He was 14 when they strapped him to the electric chair. Too small for the adult-sized mask, it slipped from his face when the switch was pulled. Another was 16. He spoke of demons before his lethal injection. Some begged for forgiveness. Others met death with defiance. All were still kids when they were sentenced to die. This is the true story of America's youngest condemned, children who committed unthinkable crimes and paid the ultimate price. But were they monsters or just broken boys no one tried to save? Number 1, George Stinney Jr., executed at 14. In 1944, the town of Alcaloo, South Carolina, was split in two. White families on one side of the railroad tracks, black families on the other. In this segregated world lived 3 children whose lives would tragically intersect. Betty June Binnicker, 11, and Mary Emma Thames, 8, were white girls known for riding their bikes around town. On March 23rd, they were last seen near the black side of Alcaloo, asking George Stinney Jr. and his sister about a certain type of flower. By the next morning, the girls were found murdered in a ditch, their skulls crushed by a blunt object, likely a railroad spike. George Stinney Jr., 14, was arrested that evening. He was questioned alone for hours without a lawyer, parent, or witness. Police claimed he confessed. No written or signed confession was ever produced. George was 5 feet 1 inch, barely 90 pounds. He had no prior record, no legal counsel, and no resources. His family was driven from town under threat of violence. His trial lasted just 1 day. The all-white jury deliberated for 10 minutes. His defense called no witnesses. George was sentenced to die by electric chair. On June 16, 1944, just 83 days after the murders, George was executed. Due to his small frame, he was strapped to a Bible used as a booster seat. The adult-sized mask slipped off during the electrocution, exposing his face as the current surged through his body. His last words were, "No, sir." For decades, the case was condemned as a miscarriage of justice. There was no physical evidence, no defense case, and a likely coerced confession. In December 2014, a South Carolina judge vacated George's conviction, citing constitutional violations and a fundamentally unfair trial. George Stinney Jr. was exonerated, 70 years too late. He remains the youngest person executed in the U.S. in the 20th century. His story is a chilling reminder of how race, youth, and injustice can collide, with irreversible consequences. While George Stinney's case highlights the dangers of rushed justice against the powerless, the next case brings us into a different, deeply unsettling territory, where youth, mental illness, and claims of the supernatural collided. Number 2, Sean Sellers, executed at 29, crime at 16, born in 1969 and raised in Oklahoma. Sean Sellers had a turbulent adolescence. By age 16, he was exploring Satanism, drinking heavily, and playing with dark fantasies he claimed were no longer just games. On September 8, 1985, Sean walked into a convenience store and shot Robert Paul Bauer, a clerk who had refused to sell him beer. 6 months later, on March 5, 1986, he murdered his mother, Vonda, and stepfather, Lee Belafato, as they slept, claiming later he was possessed by a demon he named Ezrat. Though Sellers initially claimed demonic influence, he later denied it, stating that his obsession with the occult and violence had spiraled beyond his control. He was convicted in 1986 and sentenced to death. At trial, he denied Dungeons & Dragons influenced him, though media headlines latched onto the game. Sellers became the first person executed in the U.S. in 40 years for a crime committed under the age of 17. Years into his incarceration, psychologists diagnosed him with dissociative identity disorder, DID, but the courts rejected the claim, citing the late diagnosis and lack of evidence it influenced his actions at the time. From death row, Sellers converted to Christianity. He spoke out publicly about his crimes and made emotional pleas for clemency. Figures like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Bianca Jagger, and even the European Union joined in protest. But the state remained unmoved. Sellers requested Chinese food, spring rolls, sweet and sour shrimp, and fried shrimp. All of you who hate me right now and are here waiting to watch me die, when you wake up in the morning, you won't feel any different. Let him touch your hearts. Don't hate for the rest of your lives. I love you all. He then began to sing Christian hymns. Here I go, Father. I'm coming home. Let's do it, Gary. Let's get started. His last words were sung, "Release my spirit so I can praise you. Release my spirit so I can worship you." On February 4th, 1999, Sean Sellers was executed by lethal injection. He was pronounced dead at 12:17 a.m. As we reflect on Sean Sellers' tragic end, we witness how the intersections of mental illness, youthful rage, and societal abandonment create a volatile mix. His story stands as a grim reminder of how the death penalty often plays out in cases where remorse, mental illness, and youth collide. Now we turn to a very different case, one marked not by claims of possession, but by the cold, calculated violence of a young man who, at the time of his execution, would remain unrepentant despite his final moments. Number 3, J. Kelly Pinkerton, executed at 24, crimes at 17. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Amarillo, Texas, witnessed the brutal killings of two women, Sarah Dawn Lawrence and Cher Welch, murders that would lead to the eventual execution of J. Kelly Pinkerton. Sarah Dawn Lawrence, a 64-year-old widow, was murdered during a burglary at her home in 1979. Cher Welch, a 25-year-old employee at a local furniture store, became Pinkerton's second victim the following year. Both women were stabbed, and their lives were violently cut short in a series of cold, premeditated actions. J. Kelly Pinkerton was just 17 when he committed these heinous crimes. He was arrested in 1981 after being linked to the murders through evidence and his own confession. At trial, Pinkerton was found guilty in 2 separate cases and sentenced to death. Pinkerton's crime spree was marked by a chilling level of indifference to the suffering he caused. Despite his youth, his actions seemed devoid of remorse, with no claim of mental illness or external influence. On May 15, 1986, J. Kelly Pinkerton was executed by lethal injection. As he faced his fate, his final moments revealed a man at peace, but also one burdened with a sense of inevitable conclusion. For his final meal, he requested 2 cheeseburgers with fries, onions, lettuce, tomatoes, pickles, ketchup, mustard, and mayonnaise, accompanied by a cola, a meal as ordinary as the violence he had committed. Pinkerton's last words were, "Be strong for me. I want you to know that I'm at peace with myself and with my God. I talked to everyone on the phone. I got to talk to Mom. Tell Mom goodbye. Keep your spirits up for me." Before his execution, he sang, "I bear witness to Allah. I ask for your forgiveness." His final spoken words were, "I feel dizzy. I feel dizzy." At 12:25 a.m., J. Kelly Pinkerton was pronounced dead. His father was the only family member present, perhaps a reflection of the isolation that haunted his final moments. From Amarillo to Huntsville, the machinery of capital punishment continued turning, relentless, even in the face of youth. The case of J. Kelly Pinkerton raised few doubts in the courtroom, but for some, the emotional weight lay in watching another teenager put to death. Our next case brings us to the 1990s, a crime that drew national attention not just for its brutality, but for the powerful connections it touched and the moral reckoning it forced on the number 4. Napoleon Beasley, executed at 25, crime at 17, born and raised in Tyler, Texas. Napoleon Beasley was a 17-year-old high school senior, honor student, and former class president. But on April 19, 1994, in an act that would stun his community and eventually shake the U.S. Supreme Court, he committed a murder that would cost him his life. John Ludig, a 63-year-old businessman, had just returned home to Tyler, Texas, driving his Mercedes-Benz into the garage. Unknown to him, Napoleon Beasley and brothers Cedric and Donald Coleman were lying in wait. The motive was simple: to steal the car. Beasley approached, shot Ludig in the head at close range, and tried to shoot his wife, Phyllis Ludig. She survived by playing dead. The trio fled in the stolen vehicle. Beasley was arrested shortly after. The Coleman brothers turned state's witnesses and each received 40-year sentences. Beasley, the triggerman, was sentenced to death on October 28, 1994. What made this case especially high profile was the victim's son, J. Michael Ludig, a federal appeals court judge, later shortlisted for the U.S. Supreme Court. Beasley's appeals drew support from Desmond Tutu, Jimmy Carter, and even Justice Antonin Scalia acknowledged the case's complexity. Still, the legal process held firm. On May 28, 2002, Napoleon Beasley was executed by lethal injection at the Walls Unit in Huntsville, Texas. His case became a lightning rod in the debate over executing juvenile offenders. Last meal, Beasley declined a special last meal. Final words. The act I committed to put me here was not just heinous, it was senseless. But the person who committed that act is no longer here. I am. I'm sorry for what's happening here tonight, not just for me, but for everyone affected. I'm disappointed that a system that is supposed to protect and uphold what is just and right can be so much like me when I made the same shameful mistake. He was pronounced dead at 6:17 p.m. Napoleon Beasley's execution reignited debate around the death penalty for juvenile offenders. Just 3 years later, in 2005, the U.S. Supreme Court would rule in Roper v. Simmons that executing those under 18 at the time of their crimes was unconstitutional. Beasley didn't live to see that change. Napoleon Beasley's case stirred national and international debate, ultimately contributing to a major Supreme Court ruling just years after his death. But in Texas, the wheels of capital punishment continued. Number 5. Ruben Montoya Cantu, executed at 26, crime at 17. In San Antonio, Texas, 17-year-old Ruben Montoya Cantu was accused of killing Pedro Gomez, a man shot multiple times during a robbery in November 1984. There was no physical evidence tying Cantu to the scene, yet prosecutors moved forward, relying heavily on the testimony of a single eyewitness, Juan Moreno, who had also been shot. Cantu denied involvement and maintained his innocence throughout. Despite that, he was convicted and sentenced to death. Years later, the cracks began to show. Juan Moreno recanted, saying he had been pressured into identifying Cantu. Another witness also withdrew their statement. Even the district attorney who oversaw the original case admitted he had serious doubts, saying, "We did the best we could, but I do not believe he committed that crime." But the courts disagreed. Despite mounting concern and multiple appeals, the execution went forward. On August 24, 1993, Ruben Cantu was executed by lethal injection at the Walls Unit in Huntsville, Texas. Cantu requested chewing gum, but it was denied. Final words, no, sir. Years after his death, a Texas judge upheld the conviction, but critics noted that this same judge had also presided over Cantu's original trial, raising concerns about judicial bias. To this day, many believe that Texas executed an innocent man. For Ruben Cantu, the echoes of doubt grew louder after his death. But in our next case, the controversy wasn't just about guilt, it was about disparity. The punishment handed to the teenage gunman was death, while his younger accomplice, his girlfriend, walked free after just a few years. Number 6. Douglas Christopher Thomas, executed at 26, crime at 17. In the small town of Carrollton, Virginia, 17-year-old Douglas Christopher Thomas fell deeply in love with Jessica Wiseman, a 14-year-old whose parents disapproved of their relationship. Fueled by obsession and teenage rebellion, Thomas and Wiseman allegedly conspired to remove the obstacle, her parents. On the night of November 3, 1990, Thomas entered the Wiseman home and shot both her mother and father at close range while they slept. The prosecution said it was done at Jessica's urging. At trial, the two were treated very differently. Jessica was tried as a juvenile and served just 7 years. Douglas, on the other hand, was tried as an adult. He was sentenced to death. In a final interview, Thomas expressed regret, but also frustration. "It overwhelms me that Jessica only got 7 years. I made the wrong decision, but I don't think America should execute juvenile offenders. That basically means saying we have no chance at rehabilitation." On January 10, 2000, Douglas Christopher Thomas was executed by lethal injection at the Greensville Correctional Center in Girard, Virginia. Last meal, fried chicken. Final words. No public final statement, but in private conversations, Thomas reportedly maintained remorse until the end. Douglas Thomas's case exposed the troubling disparity in sentencing among juvenile offenders, particularly when co-defendants walk free. But the next young man didn't share his fate with anyone. His path to execution was solitary, violent, and began much earlier than most. Number 7. Charles Rumbaugh, executed at 28, crime at 17. Charles Rumbaugh was no stranger to the criminal justice system. By age 17, he had already built a reputation as a troubled youth with a history of robberies and violent behavior. On April 4, 1975, in San Angelo, Texas, that history took a fatal turn. During an armed robbery at a jewelry store, Rumbaugh shot and killed the store owner. Just days earlier, he had also robbed a motel. He was quickly arrested and by 1976, sentenced to death. While awaiting execution, he escaped from jail, but his freedom was short-lived. He was recaptured soon after. On September 11, 1985, Charles Rumbaugh became the first person executed in Texas for a crime committed as a juvenile since the death penalty was reinstated. Last meal, none requested. Last words. Although you may not forgive my transgressions, I forgive yours against me. I am ready to begin my journey. No appeals, no clemency pleas. Rumbaugh accepted his sentence and met his death in silence. Charles Rumbaugh's execution was marked by quiet resignation. But our next case couldn't be more different. It's a story steeped in horror, mental illness, and international outrage. The execution of Johnny Frank Garrett remains one of the most emotionally and ethically charged in U.S. death penalty history. Number 8, Johnny Frank Garrett, executed at 28, crime at 17. On Halloween night, 1981, in Amarillo, Texas, Sister Tadia Benz, a 76-year-old nun, was found raped and murdered in her convent. The brutal nature of the crime shook the tight-knit Catholic community. Police arrested Johnny Frank Garrett, a troubled 17-year-old who lived nearby. His fingerprints were allegedly found at the scene, and prosecutors claimed he confessed, though the circumstances of that confession have been heavily disputed. At trial, no evidence of Garrett's childhood trauma or mental illness was presented to the jury. Yet behind the scenes, his story was grim. Garrett had suffered years of sexual and physical abuse and was later diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. As his execution date neared, Pope John Paul II personally pleaded for clemency. Others followed, including Amnesty International and mental health advocates. But Texas officials stood firm. On February 11, 1992, Garrett was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit. Last meal, strawberry and chocolate ice cream. Last words, I would like to thank my family for loving me and taking care of me. The rest of the world can kiss my ever-loving ass. He was pronounced dead at 6:10 p.m. His final act was one of defiance, a mirror, perhaps, to the chaos he had lived through. Garrett's case left the world questioning the justice system's treatment of mentally ill juveniles. But even before him, another execution had sparked national debate, this time in Louisiana and by electric chair. His name was Dalton Prejean. Number 9, Dalton Prejean, executed at 30, crime at 17. On July 2, 1977, Dalton Prejean, a 17-year-old from Louisiana, was riding with 3 friends after a night of drinking. When State Trooper Donald Cleveland pulled them over for a broken taillight, the encounter escalated into an argument. Without warning, Prejean pulled a .38 caliber revolver and shot Officer Cleveland twice, killing him instantly. Despite a documented low IQ, mental health issues, and a troubled upbringing, Prejean was convicted of murder and sentenced to death in 1978. He was black, the officer white, and racial tensions surrounded the trial. Prejean's defense argued diminished responsibility due to his intellectual and psychological impairments, but all appeals failed, including one to the U.S. Supreme Court. On May 18, 1990, Prejean was executed in the electric chair at Angola Prison in Louisiana. Last meal, seafood platter and orange soda. Last words, nothing will be accomplished. I am at peace with myself. I would like to thank everyone who has supported me through all these years. My son will be a better person by not letting something like this ruin his life. Stay strong, keep fighting, keep praying. Dalton Prejean was pronounced dead at 9:14 p.m. as 24 members of Officer Cleveland's family watched in solemn silence. Each of these cases reveals a dark intersection of youth, violence, and justice, where teenagers made irreversible choices and a system responded with the ultimate punishment. Whether driven by impulse, trauma, or cruelty, the outcome was the same: execution. But the questions remain. Should a nation that prides itself on second chances execute those who weren't old enough to vote, drink, or enlist? Can a child truly comprehend the weight of a death sentence? And more importantly, can we? If these stories moved you, unsettled you, or made you question what justice really means, then don't stay silent. Share this video to keep the conversation alive. Subscribe for more true crime stories that don't just inform, but demand reflection. And let us know in the comments. Should juveniles ever face the death penalty? Because justice isn't just about the past, it's about the choices we make today.